Hi, this is Wesley Gospel, and incidentally enough, I'm wearing the exact same shirt that I was wearing several years ago uh, in my video, A Biblical Economic Philosophy. So this is my biblical economics update. I'm still not where I want to be as far as knowing all that I want to know with this, but I've made some strides since then. Intellectually up here, and also a little bit on the monetary side as well. So definitely thanks be to God according according to the Word of God on that. So in Jesus' name, I encourage, according to Deuteronomy 8, remembering God as we pursue economic growth. Okay, so I've got to the point where, intellectually speaking, there are at least 7 main categories that I've broken down that are essential to a biblical economic point of view. Most of this, a lot of this, is coming from the Puritans. From the 15th and 16th century, a little bit of the early mid 17th century around England, with John Wesley and Benjamin Franklin and Daniel Defoe kind of being the last of those people. So who are the people that I'm drawing from at this point? The main thinkers that I'm drawing from at this point, the main books that I'm drawing from at this point are the following. R.H. Tawney's Religion and the Rise of Capitalism gives you generally a sort of history of Christian economic theology. Although it can be kind of dry, it is full of a lot of data, and you can't do without it, really, seriously. You should read it, study it carefully, before you move into any other side trails with this stuff. Kathleen MacArthur's The Economic Ethics of John Wesley, really great study. I just wish it had referred to more of his sermons by name, but it's very good. Gives a very accurate view and spirit of John Wesley's view of gain all you can, save all you can, give all you can, from his sermon, The Use of Money. Leland Ryken's Worldly Saints, great introduction to Puritan views of economics. Lots of quotes from direct Puritan writings. Ian Hart, in the Evangelical Quarterly in 1995, had written 3 academic articles, all of which reviewed the theological views of ordinary work from Martin Luther's writings, John Calvin's writings, and the Puritans. Mark Valeri, I have not read, but I'm planning on digging into pretty soon. He wrote a book called Heavenly Merchandise. He had also done a review of Jonathan Edwards' views on economics, which were mainly an evaluation of financial sins, or economic sins and vices. The interesting thing about Mark Valeri is that he, like a guy named Bernard Bailyn, he has done the unique study of adding in what the Puritans invested in. A lot of the studies do not go into this. They avoid the subject. They just leave it. It's completely silent. Well, what did the Puritans invest in? So he has a lot of references in that book, Heavenly Merchandise, with the Z in there, on investing. And essentially, what did they invest in? Gold, silver, land, and yes, occasionally joint stock companies. The stock market was starting to be created in London. They were very leery of the stock market, mainly because stockbrokers lured people into buying on margin, and they would go bankrupt and go into debt because they were borrowing money from stockbrokers in order to buy stocks. That would cause them to go into debt when the stocks plummeted. So the Puritans were against that, buying on margin, but every once in a while the Puritans would say, okay, I can invest in this company responsibly and ethically, as long as I'm not buying on margin, as long as I'm paying in full for the stock of my own money, of my own surplus. And I believe that the stock in the company, the shares, are for a good, righteous, holy company. So, for example, the Massachusetts Bay Company, the Plymouth Company, the Virginia Company, these were Puritan colonization companies that focused on agriculture and going into the American and creating colonies. Okay, and so they saw these endeavors as ways to spread Puritan values, and at the same time make some money off of agriculture and reaping the fruits of the land. Some were even hoping that some of them would strike some gold mines. So, yeah, they invested in companies in back then. They did, but there was a leeriness, and ever since Martin Luther was totally against investing in stocks. They even had it back then. So, in the 1500s, Martin Luther saw stock investment as a total scam. It only really usually seems to financially benefit the company owner, not the person who's investing in stock. So most of the people back then in the 1600s invested in gold, silver, land, and mining companies, gold mines. They lived in a time in which mercantilism, the idea that gold is how you measure money. So governments even believed in this, and there was the gold standard, and so the idea was that you're going to send out Hernando Cortez, the conquistadors. You're going to send out Christopher Columbus. You're going to send out Captain John Smith, Pocahontas. You're going to send out these Puritan Sir Walter Raleigh. You're going to send them out and go into the Americas to try to find gold mines, and then they're going to ship the gold back on the ships and bring it back to their Spanish or to their English kings. That was the philosophy of the time, and the idea was that you were going to strengthen the governments by enabling these governments to build up these gold banks like Fort Knox, and that was so investing was centered around that idea. Yes, people invested in more than gold, but gold was like the gold standard. That was the target. Like, if you were going to invest in anything back then, you were going to invest in gold bullion. You're going to invest in gold bars like moneymetals.com, which honestly, I'll get to that later. I think that people today should be investing in moneymetals.com, and I'm not saying that should be the only thing you do. And I'm not saying you shouldn't invest in stocks, because the Puritans did, but that should definitely be part of your investment portfolio, gold and silver. And then land. If you can pull it off, land. What did the Puritans do with land? They bought land, they turned them into farms, and so that the farms could produce more money. They turned them into mines. If they were lucky enough, they could produce more money from coal mines, gold mines, silver mines. Or they would buy land and they would build a factory and create clothes in there, and then the factory's producing. So the land was seen as a way to create business. Okay, so you buy the land, you don't have to rent it, you don't have to lease it, you buy it, you own it in order to build a business to operate off of that land. That's how the Puritans viewed investment. Gold, silver, land, build a business on land, occasionally invest in good companies, but never ever buy on margin. So I'm not saying that I know everything about Puritan investment, but that's what I can see for now. I'm also planning on drawing from William Perkins' Treatise of the Vocations. According to 1 Corinthians 7:20, they believed that God calls people to certain callings or careers, and that they shouldn't be constantly changing their career. It's okay to be upwardly mobile. In fact, you should be upwardly mobile, but you should never really change your job category. If you're called to be a salesman, then you be a salesman. If you're called to be an accountant, then you be an accountant. If you're called to be an engineer, you be an engineer. If you're called to be a policeman, you be a policeman. You don't keep on flipping around and change like 5 different kinds of categories. You now, granted, if you're a super young man and you're still in the process of finding out what that calling is, then yeah, you can experiment. But usually, by the time you're like 30 or 40 years old, you should have that figured out. You should figure out what you're skilled at, what you're good at, and you should kind of feel, in a sense, the hand of God. That whenever you do that particular job task, you have the Midas touch. You're really good at it. You might not like it necessarily, but you're good at it. You know you're good at it. And people say you're good at it. That could be your calling. All right, so Puritans were big on that, staying in your calling. It provides economic security. Yes, you can be upwardly mobile, you can change companies, but stay in the same job category. They were really big on that. Richard Baxter's, it's a concise version that only focuses on the economic elements. It's called Chapters from a Christian Directory. It was edited by Tawney's wife, Jeanette Tawney. Chapters from a Christian Directory by Richard Baxter. Planning on pulling that out. Daniel Defoe's The Complete English Tradesman. He was an outspoken Puritan guy. He actually got pilloried one time because he was criticizing the Church of England for their intolerance. He got pilloried, put in the wood things, and mocked and stuff for several days. He was all big on preaching against sin. I like this guy. He also wrote a book called The Villainy of Stock Jobbers Detected, which basically was a critique, one of the first critiques of the stock market, particularly of the idea of pressuring people to buy on margin, to borrow money from the stock jobber, stockbroker, and then people would go into debt and even bankruptcy from these guys. So a lot of the Puritans, like Richard Steele, in his book, The Religious Tradesman, said, don't buy on margin. Wesley said the exact same thing in a letter to some guy. So the whole Puritan mentality was like, look, just either A, avoid the stock market completely, or B, if you are going to buy stock, make sure you're buying it from a good Christian company that has high moral standards, has a fear of God, and never, ever, ever buy on margin. Never borrow money from a stockbroker in order to buy some stocks. Not even partially. Not even 30%. Just don't do it. Okay. So yeah, they were really strong. They were very strong on that. Benjamin Franklin's at the tail end of all of this. He borrowed from Cotton Mather some Puritan economic ideas and put it into a little tiny book called The Way to Wealth. Most of those are like kind of proverbs and aphorisms, but we put his picture on the $100 bill for a reason. So he regurgitated and repeated a lot of these Puritan biblical teachings on economics, and that's why he's at the tail end, because he cast off a lot of the Puritan theology and became kind of a deist, but he's like the triumph of Puritan theology as far as getting it popularized in the beginning stages of the American Revolution. So I'm going to still include him in there because I see him as still a prophet of Puritan economics, at least to the American country and the establishment of the American dream, the American philosophy of success. So anyway, that's that. These are the sources. They're my primary sources. Obviously, I'm not just pulling from these guys. Tawney's book really got everything started for me. I mean, I had no idea that the Puritans were so economic. They're economically developed in their thinking. And Religion and the Rise of Capitalism showed me that. This is what I've been looking for all along. Since 2015, I put together a little booklet called The Bible and Financial Growth, but what I really realized I was looking for this whole time was, Richard Baxter and John Wesley, and what these guys believed about economics, the Puritans mainly. So when I found Worldly Saints by Leland Ryken, it was that, and it was R.H. Tawney. I mean, those two guys, like, complete explosion of my brain, all over the place. I mean, those guys really caused me to see this is the biblical economic point of view. These are the views you should be having about money, work, jobs, everything related to money in economic philosophy. And why do we have this secular dichotomy today of Adam Smith versus Karl Marx, of secular capitalism versus secular communism? It's like, so many options here. I mean, we've got secular philosophy over here and secular philosophy over here. So when it comes to money, which one do you want to pick? Would you like a secular point of view or perhaps a secular point of view? So I realized what happened. People got away from the Puritans and entered into a phase in English and American history in the late 1700s, early 1800s, in which everything was atheistic with regard to business, and people had to start reevaluating everything. Karl Marx had to start reevaluating economics and business in a completely atheistic frame of thinking, and so did Adam Smith. Adam Smith, did he believe in God? Maybe, but I mean, you have a completely secularized business philosophy in his Wealth of Nations. And it's so huge, so it makes him look like he's smart, and he really knows what he's talking about, and why question him? I mean, he wrote 4 or 5 volumes worth of stuff, so why even question the guy, right? Yeah, but he's at the tail end of centuries of economic theology. And the Christian theologians and the Puritan pastors were the guys who taught this stuff for years, that hard work at jobs and being frugal with your money would produce economic financial growth. If you're working hard at a job, you're making money. And if you're reluctant to spend money, and if you live thrifty, you're going to be able to have surplus and save it, and produce money. So it's diligence and thrift, or it's industry and frugality, or it's diligence and frugality, or it's whatever you want to call it. It's hard work plus being frugal with your spending your money equals financial growth. That was the teaching for centuries through the Puritans and all, through the 1500s and 1600s. What they taught. How did you get financial growth biblically? You worked hard and you lived frugal, and that's how you get financial growth. There's more to it than that. There's a lot of details surrounding that, but that's the essential formula. If you want to grow rich, you have to work super hard, and you have to be reluctant to spend money, and you have to live real simple, and you have to avoid luxury items. That's the simple formula. So there's more to it than that, guys. A whole lot more thoughts to be shared than just diligence and thrift equals financial growth. So what is to be said? Well, I'm going to get into this. So hopefully, without making my head look twisted, I'm using two computer screens here, so I'm going to try to get my notes here straight. Okay. All right. So here's what I've got so far. Christians, biblical Christians, people who follow the Bible, have the fear of God, okay, they're supposed to adhere to the 10 Commandments. Defiant, rebellious adherence to the 10 Commandments. I say rebellious and defiance because if you're really strict about the 10 Commandments, allowing those rules to be part of your life, it is not going to go easy for you in the business world, okay? Because the business world is filled with satanic, atheistic, worldly principles that are vices, and they're constantly causing you to compromise in the 10 Commandments. But you see, the Bible says, "Thou shalt not covet." You shall not commit adultery. You shall not make to yourself. You shall not steal. Right? These things are always broken in the business world. These laws, and so Satan is the god of this world, the evil, lowercase g, god of this world, 2 Corinthians 4:4. And out of financial convenience, millions of American Christians are complying with his behavioral expectations. It's the reality. So how did this start? I mean, we came from medieval Europe, a totally Christian environment. How did we get to this state, this completely godless business world? How did this happen? And how do we have this complete separation of church and state, of church and business, and church and company? And we've got churches in every corner, which are being very, very weakly attended, and we have companies where people are like, don't mention Jesus, everywhere. Why is there this sharp separation? Why is this? Right? What happened? Why are there atheists? Why are there Muslims? Why are there non-Christians everywhere? How did this happen? I mean, we ended up with a total crusades, European Christian countries, and now we've noticed no secular, and everything's secular. What happened? All right? Well, the Age of Enlightenment happened. Okay, so in the 1600s, in the 1500s, 1600s, and 1700s was a progressive move towards the late 1700s, pinnacling in something called the Age of Enlightenment. All right, so this was a progressive move away from Catholic mysticism, supernaturalism, and towards rationalistic thinking, using your head, exploring the sciences, and questioning biblical authority, even in many cases. This is what led to the secular philosophers David Hume and skepticism and atheists and every little shade and grade of atheism and skepticism, such as agnosticism and deism and every other kind of weirdism out there. Anything that has ism on it is most likely related to some form of skepticism, except for Pentecostalism. But so all these isms came branching into atheism and skepticism and rationalism and deism. All right, people were like, I don't know if I believe in God. Maybe I do. Why? Because I have to question everything now, instead of just accept the authority of the Pope. So that's what was going on. In a sense, the Protestant Reformation caused it. In another sense, it was just the Renaissance and the Age of Enlightenment, and people having a general feeling of skepticism in general, all right, and just using their heads and just questioning authority, okay, and questioning ideas all the time. So that can be good in a way, but it can also be abused, and eventually it was abused, and we ended up with a completely godless society with compartmentalized Christianity. All right, that's what we ended up with. It took a couple hundred years for us to get to this state, but that's what we have right now. So how did the ball get rolling? Well, the ball got rolling in the Renaissance, okay, with a man named Niccolo Machiavelli. In the 1500s, he wrote a book called The Prince, and this book taught that if you're a king, a prince, a ruler, or any kind of a politician, that if you use occasional deception and cruelty, you'll be able to maintain any position of power in any institution. He wrote these things reluctantly and mainly from his own personal observations of how he saw princes operating in his times. But did he go to great lengths to criticize these things, these vices? No. Did he challenge rulers to aim for a higher biblical standard? No. He just said, look, these are my observations, and these are just the way things work in politics. They use occasional deception and occasional cruelty, and they get their way. And so this main theme took hold, that leaders should walk all over people in order to get their way. And the perfect embodiment of this was King Henry VIII. He read this book, The Prince. He said, I like this book. And so he manipulated through deception and through cruelty. He manipulated theologians to justify him marrying 6 different wives in a Christian context, and even beheading a couple of them. Okay, so that's what got the ball rolling. That book was aimed at politicians and at corrupting them with acceptable, necessary evils like occasional deception and cruelty. Now, in the 1700s, a guy came around, and his name was Bernard Mandeville, and he wrote a book called The Fable of the Bees. Now, he said a lot of the same things that Machiavelli said, but he said, look, let's not just think about this in terms of politicians. Let's think about this in terms of just the common businessman. Okay? So if you want to be a successful businessman, you should use deception and cruelty, like Machiavelli says. But you shouldn't just use it occasionally. You should use it like every day, as much as possible, so that it can help you to get ahead in business. He also taught people that greed is good, that people should covet after luxury items because this will inspire unrestrained greed and make them work hard at their jobs. He taught them that self-interest and business competition were just part of the way things are. And again, he spoke of them as observations. But, he brought all this stuff into a book. Businessmen all over England read this and were like, internalized everything. So that by the time 1776 came around and Adam Smith published his 4 or 5 volume work called Wealth of Nations, Adam Smith, again, making observations of the way things already were in the business world, referred to something called the invisible hand, which was self-interest and competition, and he saw these two things oscillating back and forth, guiding the economy. All right, and he called them the invisible hand, self-interest and competition. So deception, cruelty, greed, self-interest, and competition were all brought in through Machiavelli, Mandeville, and Smith. And it took, about 300 years for this to happen, for them to get away from a biblical economic philosophy and into a completely secular, narcissistic view of business values. They got away from biblical values and got into a narcissistic, psychopathic, dark triad view of how to do business. Okay? And of course, this goes against the time-tested biblical economic value of Matthew 7:12, the golden rule: do to others what you would have them do to you. This was taught by Luther, St. Antonino, and all of the Puritans as one of the main guidelines for a Christian tradesman. They called them tradesmen back then, not businessmen. They called them tradesmen. Do to others what you would have them do to you. Matthew 7:12. Your customers, you should treat them the way you want to be treated. Your co-workers, you should treat them the way you want to be treated. Your employees, you should treat them the way you want to be treated. And your bosses, you should treat them the way you should want to be treated. You should do unto others what you would have them do to you. If they would just follow that, there would be no deception, cruelty, greed, self-interest, or competition. Instead, in their place, there would be honesty, kindness, there would be the avoidance of luxury items, in other words, common sense, thrift, and frugality. There would be more philanthropy because of the self-interest elements out the door. And there wouldn't be competition, there would be cooperation. People would be working together on the job to meet a common goal rather than fighting and competing and being at each other's throats all the time. So there'd be honesty, there would be kindness, there would be frugalness, there would be philanthropy, and there'd be cooperation. If they just follow the golden rule, all these vices would be removed. You see, only an atheistic businessman, only a godless, liberal Christian who basically embodies atheistic values but claims the name of Christ would ignore the golden rule so blazingly like this, and it happens all the time. And it's just human nature to ignore the golden rule, isn't it? That's why God said to do it, because it goes against our human nature. One person that I spoke with says that there's no such thing as altruism in nature. I totally agree with that. That's why we need the Holy Spirit. Before Mandeville helped to transform the business world into a completely secular environment, it was the Christian theologians and the Puritan pastors who had the voice in economic morality. St. Antonino of Florence was the first one, really. Martin Luther came after him shortly after. And basically they preached the same thing. They preached that you should be honest in business, that you should adhere to the 10 Commandments while you're in business, that you should adhere to the Golden Rule, that you should have faith in God's financial providence, that prices should be based on fair market value, never charge more than what all the other guys are charging. Same thing with wages. Never pay your employee less than all the other guys are paying, and pay them quickly. Avoid luxury items. Avoid living in abject poverty. And after you pay your debts, do some philanthropy. Give to the poor and give to the church. This is what they taught back then about economics. It wasn't microeconomics and macroeconomics. It wasn't political economy and the wealth of nations. It was, how do you live right before God in the day-to-day, in your attitudes, in your financial choices. It was practical stuff. You see, today, economics has been so secularized, it's turned into a textbook classroom where there's absolutely no ethics involved. Now, there are classes on business ethics in college, I will admit. This would fall under the category of business ethics. But I highly doubt that any college course in a community college or a university today is going to reference the Puritans. Maybe in a business ethics class, there might be a reference to Max Weber and the Protestant ethic and the spirit of capitalism. But the problem with that is that he, first off, was not a real Christian. He was an adulterer. Now, real Christians commit adultery sometimes because they fall into sin, but he just did it and kept on doing it. He was a liberal Christian. There was evidence that he was part of a liberal Christian society organization. He questioned the Puritans because they were godly and feared the word of God. He questioned their motives. And honestly, he was a Marxist. So Max Weber, I don't, the more you press into these issues, his name's going to come up a lot. I recommend ignoring him. I recommend ignoring Max Weber, Protestant Ethic and Spirit of Capitalism, because he's essentially criticizing the Puritans, left and right. He's criticizing them. He's not explaining what they taught. He's just criticizing them. He's mocking them. He's basically saying that the only reason they worked hard because they were uncertain of their salvation. I mean, that's like mockery. All right? There's a lot more valuable things to learn from the Puritans than something from Max Weber. I'm not saying, look, after you've studied all these other books I mentioned, okay, study Max Weber as a footnote, but you're going to see how ridiculous his thesis is. And what a mockery of Puritan economics it really is. Anyway, I don't recommend reading Weber, though. Honestly, there's so much great material from St. Antonino, Luther, Calvin, Richard Baxter, and Wesley that you don't need to waste your time on that guy. I'm serious. All right, anyway, Calvin taught that if you get more money, you're going to become financially prideful. That's just human nature. To become financially prideful and compare yourselves to other men that don't have the same amount of money you do. So Calvin said the answer to this problem is Bible study and trying to keep God's commandments. That will in turn detour you from wanting luxury items and being financially prideful and being a snob. Okay? Bible study and keeping God's commandments. That will keep your attitude in check. You should also be philanthropic to the poor, not just to organizations, but to poor people. You should be able to happily give to them, not begrudgingly. That will also remove spirits of snobbery out of you. And he said you should never seek prosperity apart from God's blessing. You should never work for a company unless you feel like truly the blessing of God is in it. So, I mean, if you're in an interview and it's just F constantly, it's probably not the blessing of God. I mean, Wolf of Wall Street is probably not God's blessing. If you're going to be seeking prosperity apart from God's blessing with an F-word business owner, it's Gary Vaynerchuk, F word all the time, work hard, F-word. I mean, that's, Puritans are saying don't work for someone like that. Calvin said that work was actually meant to be intended by God to be a type of mortification of our sinful nature. If you look in Genesis 3, it explains that Adam and Eve, Adam was punished by God for eating from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. He was punished by God with work. Cursed is the ground for thy sake. So there you have it. It's supposed to help us subdue our sinful nature, not the other way around. You shouldn't have to be like, oh, I can't wait to go work so I can flirt with all the girls and cuss with my frat boy buddies. No, you should be like, I need to work my job to purge the sins out of my body. That should be your thought, why I'm going to work. When we're at work, our customers, our coworkers, our colleagues, whatever you want to call them, love thy neighbor as thy love thyself. You should be working in and under the fear of God in all the things that you do and say at work. And after all is said and done, and you've earned your possessions, Calvin said it is okay to enjoy your possessions. Just do so in moderation. Don't let it be a luxury thing and you're idolizing your possessions. But yes, it's okay to enjoy the blessings of fruits of your labor, but just do so in moderation. So in the 1600s, we're shifting away from Calvin and Geneva, and we're coming to London mainly. London, England, the Puritans, okay, they're saying, we like Calvin. Yeah, we like what he has to say. We like St. Antonino, and we like Luther. We like what they said. So they repeated all these teachings. The Puritans took it further, though. They taught more things than that. They and of course they're always looking at the Bible for their economic ideas. They were really big on emphasizing 1 Corinthians 7:20. Especially you're going to see this in the treatise of the vocations by William Perkins. The idea that God calls people to certain callings or careers. Jesus was called to be a carpenter for a time. Peter, James, and John were called to be fishermen, etc. Luke was called to be a doctor. So God calls people to certain careers, and they're not constantly changing their careers and their job categories. They might change who they're working for, but they're not going to change like their trade. Okay, so the idea is that God calls people to certain callings, 1 Corinthians 7:20, and that you should remain in that calling. They taught people that it's good to get your thoughts together about business like this, like what we're doing, but you shouldn't be so wrapped up with business affairs that you become more worldly minded than spiritually minded. A lot of secular people will say to biblical Christians, you're too heavenly minded to be of any earthly good. Well, the Puritans flipped it around and said, look, we're all about being responsible and having a work ethic, but we also believe that living a holy life is definitely more important than making money and being a great businessman. I mean, try to be a good businessman. That's a responsible thing. But living a holy life is more important. Being spiritually minded, being theologically minded, being biblically minded is way more important than being great at business skills. I mean, you should learn these things, but if you focus on them too much, you become worldly minded and earthly minded. And now your salvation's in jeopardy. One of the things they did to prevent this from becoming a problem, aka materialism, from becoming a problem, was that they sought to remain within the middle class and to never reach outside of the middle class lifestyle. So what is the middle class? This is how they understood the middle class. Proverbs 30:8-9. Remove far from me vanity and lies. Give me neither poverty nor riches. Feed me with food convenient for me, lest I be full, and deny thee and say, Who is the Lord? Or lest I be poor and steal, and take the name of my God in vain. It's not about fixing a number on it, an annual income, but it is about, look, your salvation's going to be a problem for you if you are seeking to be in the upper class. Okay. Proverbs 30:8-9 is talking about striking a balance in middle class. And going into the upper class is clearly not in something that you want to be doing if you're being a biblical Christian. The last most important thought of all of this is this. This evaluates the whole process of financial growth under the scrutinizing eyes of God. We should be remembering the presence of God in all areas of our lives. This is essential to the Puritan view of business activity. Providence. Was their word for financial miracles? Was their word for God giving us open doors, opening up doors for us at jobs? Was their word for giving us money at the last minute? Was their word for giving us opportunity, power to get wealth at the jobs, success in business, the ability to make sales successfully, stuff like this? All came under the category of a word called providence. The idea is not just related to supernatural provision from God. It's not just related to financial miracles, but it's also just related to the fact that God is micromanaging the universe. And he opens up doorways for you to get certain job interviews and get jobs and stuff like that. God is blessing these efforts, and he's watching over, and whenever he gives you success, whenever you experience business success, you should look at that as the blessing of God. As long as you're going about it in a godly way, you should thank God for your business success. But you can't apply that if you're in a satanic business culture. Only if you're, obviously, you're doing honest business, right? Honest, good business, and you're not cussing your way through the day, and stuff like this, and you're not swindling people, stuff like this. You can honestly, in clear conscience before God, say that God is blessing your business activity. Now, you look at Deuteronomy 8:11-14 and 7-18, and you get the gist. Beware that thou forget not the Lord thy God in not keeping his commandments. AKA, first thing you're doing is you're being aware of the 10 commandments all through your workday. Second thing you're doing, lest when thou hast eat and art full, and hast built goodly houses and dwelt therein, talking about private property, home ownership, nice goodly houses. Afterwards, and thy silver and thy gold is multiplied, talking about saving and investing in silver and gold and multiplying it. Then thine heart be lifted up, and thou forget that the Lord thy God, and then thine heart be lifted up, and thou forget the Lord thy God. This can happen when you get a nice house and you get lots of silver and gold, and you're not aware of the 10 commandments. You're not keeping the 10 commandments. Now becoming atheistic, and you're forgetting the Lord thy God. And then you say in your heart, my power and the might of my hand has gotten me this wealth. I did this all by myself. God didn't help me at all. All right? God doesn't like that. Then it says, but thou shalt remember the Lord thy God, for it is he that giveth thee power to get wealth. This is the view of the Puritans. You must believe this belief if you're going to be involved in biblical economics and thinking the right ways. And the result of this belief is thanksgiving, and hence the pilgrims and the Thanksgiving holiday tradition. You are to give prayers of thanksgiving. You break the word thanksgiving out into two, it means giving thanks. You switch the word around. Giving thanks. Thank you, God. Thank you for my business success. Thank you for that financial miracle check that just came in the mail. Thank you for giving me that job opportunity. Thank you for allowing me to win that interview. Thank you for that sale. Thank you for that hot lead I just got. Right? So you should thank God for every business success you have, just like the Puritans, acknowledging his providential care and concern over your life, saying prayers of thanks to God for giving us success in business and opening up business doorways and opportunities for us, and job opportunities, is obedience to Deuteronomy 8. It's the act of remembering the Lord's role in empowering Christian people, Christian business people, with the ability to get wealth. You're thinking, you're remembering, and you're acknowledging God's role in that. So you're saying prayers of thanksgiving to him, plus you're giving philanthropy to the poor out of your surplus after you've paid off your debts. And these were seen as as you're making money, as you're getting wealth, these were seen as the remedies for becoming a snob, becoming financially prideful, and losing your soul. You thank the Lord for your success. You give to the poor. You impoverish yourself just a little bit, and you humble yourself economically, spiritually and economically, so that you keep yourself at a distance from becoming a snob. You're still multiplying silver and gold. You're still living in a goodly house, but your attitude is being adjusted as you're financially growing through prayers of thanksgiving and philanthropy to the poor and keeping the 10 Commandments. This is essentially, in a nutshell, the Puritan view of economics, the biblical view of economics. There's a lot more to it than that, believe it or not. I've just scratched the surface. I've got I'll be out in a sec. I've got 7 chapters outlined for this book. Part 1, the Golden Rule. Chapter 1, Chapter 2, Providence and Honesty. Part 2, Financial Growth. Chapter 3, Chapter 4, Diligence and Investment. Part 3, Spending Money. Chapter 5, 6, and 7, Thrift, Debt, Philanthropy. To me, this is essentially the outline of everything I was just trying to say. Obviously, I want to get into quotations with that. It's going to take me a while, but it's exciting to be able to get this. And R.H. Tawney used to call this the economic casuistry. I can't even pronounce this word. Casuistry. Casuistry? Man. Let me see if I can get somebody on Google to pronounce that for me.
Casuistry.
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 Casuistry. The economic casuistry of the Christian church. Basically, that means, casuistry means, the resolution of moral problems by the application of theological rules to particular instances. They called them cases of conscience back then. One of the main things R.H. Tawney drills into people's heads over and over is that usury is a sin. Usury. The idea that, loans, interest rates climbing above 12%, up into the 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, and 20% interest rates. This was seen as usury and a sin. Loan sharks, title loans, giving them the car title. If you can't pay your loan, they take your car, they repo you. Usury, taking advantage of the poor with loans and high interest rates. Did they believe in mortgaging? Puritans, yes, eventually they did. They came to believe that any sort of interest rate underneath 12% was okay. And so today, honestly, most mortgages are around 3%. It's not. We've learned our lesson from that. But honestly, what do I believe about mortgages? Personally, I can give you a bunch of reasons why, but the golden age of capitalism was riding off of World War II vets getting FHA-insured mortgages from the government. That's another story. Generally speaking, Great Recession, Great Depression has all come off of going to the bank to get a mortgage. So the goal should be to get a modest house from the government through an FHA insured mortgage. That's another story. That's for another time. But anyway, this is where I'm at. God bless you guys out there. And fear God as you pursue work. I haven't even talked about telecommuting. Did I even mention telecommuting in my outline? I didn't mention that because telecommuting is mentioned in my diligence chapter. Telecommuting and or self-employment, really important here, because as you transferred into the Puritan age, the monks, the monasteries were destroyed. And so the godliness and the piety that the monks were pursuing was thrown out as everybody jumps into the world to be able to take care of themselves. I believe telecommuting, and the tech industry in particular today, is the safest place for anybody trying to practice holiness in their life and at the same time pursue financial growth. That's another story. Telecommuting, flexjobs.com, all that. But anyway, I'm digressing. I've talked about mortgages and telecommuting, and I could just keep on going, but I won't. So, God bless you guys out there, in Jesus' name.